The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the dense canopy of Blackwood Forest. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting toward the sky as if trying to escape the earth itself. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and decaying leaves, and the only sounds were the distant calls of crows and the rustling of leaves in the wind. It was a place that seemed to exist outside of time, a place where the rules of the natural world no longer applied. 5 college students stood at the edge of the forest, their backpacks laden with supplies for a weekend campaign. They had come to Blackwood with a purpose: to document the strange occurrences that had been reported in the area. Over the past few months, hikers had gone missing, and those who returned spoke of eerie sounds, ghostly apparitions, and a feeling of being watched. The local authorities had dismissed these claims as the ramblings of overactive imaginations. But the students were determined to uncover the truth. Leading the group was Maya, a sharp-witted and ambitious journalism major with a knack for uncovering hidden truths. She had organized the trip, convinced that Blackwood held the key to a story that would launch her career. Beside her was Ethan, her boyfriend and a skeptical biology student who had only agreed to come along to keep an eye on her. He was the voice of reason in the group, always quick to dismiss the supernatural as mere superstition. Then there was Lila, a free-spirited art student who saw beauty in the macabre. She had brought along her sketchpad, eager to capture the eerie atmosphere of the forest. Ryan, a tech-savvy computer science major, was in charge of documenting their findings with his camera and audio equipment. Rounding out the group was Jake, a laid-back philosophy student who was more interested in the existential implications of their journey than the practicalities. As they stood at the edge of the forest, Maya turned to her friends, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "This is it, guys. Blackwood. By the time we leave, we'll have the story of a lifetime." Ethan frowned, his arms crossed over his chest. "I still think this is a bad idea. We don't know what's out there. People have gone missing, Maya." "That's exactly why we need to go," Maya replied, undeterred. "If there's something dangerous in there, people need to know about it. We can't just ignore it." Lila adjusted the strap of her backpack, her eyes scanning the trees. "I think it's beautiful. There's something haunting about this place, like it's alive." Ryan chuckled, though there was a nervous edge to his voice. "Yeah, alive and probably hungry. Let's just hope it's not us on the menu." Jake, ever the philosopher, tilted his head thoughtfully. "What if the forest isn't the danger? What if it's us? What if we bring the darkness with us?" Maya rolled her eyes. "Enough with the existential crap, Jake. Let's just get moving. We've got a lot of ground to cover before nightfall." With that, the group ventured into the forest, the trees closing in behind them like a curtain. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere changed. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, casting the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the outside world faded away, replaced by an oppressive silence. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, the group set up camp in a small clearing. Ryan busied himself with setting up the camera and audio equipment, while Ethan and Jake gathered firewood. Lila sat on a fallen log, sketching the twisted trees that surrounded them, and Maya pored over a map of the forest, trying to plot their route for the next day. The fire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows on the trees. For a moment, the forest seemed almost peaceful, the warmth of the fire pushing back the chill in the air. But as the night deepened, the atmosphere grew tense. "Do you guys hear that?" Lila asked suddenly, her pencil freezing mid-stroke. Everyone fell silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the crackling of the fire. Then faintly they heard it, a low guttural growl that seemed to come from all around them. It was a sound that didn't belong in the natural world, a sound that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. Ethan stood up, his eyes scanning the darkness. "It's probably just an animal, a bear or something." But Maya shook her head. "That's not a bear. Bears don't sound like that." The growl grew louder, closer, and the fire suddenly flickered as if a cold wind had swept through the clearing. Ryan grabbed his camera, his hands trembling as he tried to focus on the source of the sound. "I'm getting this on tape. Whatever it is, we need proof." Jake, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "We shouldn't be here. This place, it's not right. We need to leave." Maya turned to him, her eyes blazing. "We're not leaving. Not until we find out what's going on." As if in response to her words, the growl turned into a deafening roar, and the fire was extinguished in an instant, plunging the clearing into darkness. The group scrambled to their feet, their flashlights cutting through the blackness as they searched for the source of the sound. But there was nothing there. The forest was silent once more, the only sound the rapid beating of their hearts. The next morning, the group woke up to find that something had changed. The forest seemed darker, more oppressive, as if it had shifted during the night. The trees loomed closer together, their branches intertwining to form a dense canopy that blocked out the sun. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground was covered in a fine layer of mist that clung to their ankles as they walked. As they packed up their camp, Ryan noticed something strange. "Guys, look at this!" He held up his camera, the screen displaying the footage from the night before. The growl was clearly audible, but when Ryan zoomed in on the darkness, something appeared, a pair of glowing red eyes staring directly into the lens. Maya's breath caught in her throat. "What the hell is that?" Ethan shook his head, his skepticism wavering. "I don't know, but I don't like it. We need to be careful." As they continued deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew more sinister. The trees seemed to close in around them, their twisted branches forming grotesque shapes that looked almost human. The mist thickened, obscuring their vision and making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Then they heard it, a whisper so faint that at first they thought it was their imagination. But as they walked, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were coming from all around them, a chorus of voices that spoke in a language they couldn't understand. Lila stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear that? They're talking to us." Maya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to keep moving. We can't let this get to us." But the whispers were impossible to ignore. They seemed to seep into their minds, filling their thoughts with dark, unsettling images. Visions of death and despair flashed before their eyes, and they felt a growing sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm them. Jake, who had been silent for most of the journey, suddenly spoke up. "We need to leave. Now this place, it's not just a forest, it's alive, and it's feeding on us." Maya turned to him, her eyes blazing. "We're not leaving. Not until we find out what's going on." But even as she spoke, she felt a chill run down her spine. The whispers were growing louder, more urgent, and she could feel the forest closing in around them, suffocating them. As the day wore on, the group's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. The whispers had become a constant presence, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from within their own minds. The forest itself seemed to be conspiring against them, the trees shifting and twisting to block their path, the mist thickening until they could barely see each other. Then as they rounded a bend in the path, they saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the trail. It was tall and gaunt, its body shrouded in a tattered cloak that seemed to blend into the mist. Its face was hidden in shadow, but they could feel its gaze on them, cold and unyielding. Maya took a step forward, her voice trembling. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised a bony hand and pointed deeper into the forest. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the mist. The group stood frozen in place, their hearts pounding in their chest. Ryan was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Did anyone else see that?" Ethan nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, And I don't think it was human. Lila clutched her sketch pad to her chest, her hands trembling. We need to leave, now before it comes back. But Maya shook her head, her determination unwavering. We need to follow it. It's leading us somewhere. We can't turn back now. Reluctantly, the group followed the path the figure had indicated, the whispers growing louder with every step. The forest seemed to grow darker, the trees closing in around them until they felt like they were walking through a tunnel. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath their feet was soft and spongy, as if it were made of rotting flesh. Then they reached a clearing, a small circular space surrounded by towering trees. In the center of the clearing was a stone altar, covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. The whispers reached a crescendo, filling their minds with a cacophony of voices that threatened to drive them mad. Maya stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the altar. This is it. This is what we've been looking for. But as she approached the altar, the figure reappeared, standing between her and the stone. Its cloak billowed in an unseen wind, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent light. It raised its hand, and the whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. Then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. You should not have come here. Maya took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. What are you? The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes fixed on her. I am the guardian of this place, the keeper of the darkness. And you? You have awakened something that should have remained buried. Before Maya could respond, the ground beneath them began to shake, the trees swaying as if caught in a violent storm. The air grew colder, and the mist thickened, obscuring their vision. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever, filling their minds with images of death and despair. Then, the figure raised its hand, and the world went black. When Maya opened her eyes, she was no longer in the forest. She was standing in a dark, cavernous space, the walls lined with strange, pulsating symbols that glowed with an eerie light. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath her feet was soft and spongy, as if it were made of rotting flesh. She looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan? Lila? Ryan? Jake? Where are you? But there was no response. She was alone. Then she heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around her. She turned, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. The growl grew louder, closer, and she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She spun around, her flashlight illuminating the figure from the forest. It was standing right behind her, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Its cloak billowed in an unseen wind, and its bony hand reached out towards her. Maya stumbled back, her heart racing. What do you want from me? The figure tilted its head, its voice a low, guttural growl. You have awakened the darkness. Now you must face it. Before Maya could respond, the ground beneath her feet gave way, and she fell into the abyss. Maya woke up to find herself back in the forest, lying on the ground beside the stone altar. The sun was shining through the trees and the air was warm and still. The whispers were gone, replaced by the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the wind. She sat up, her head spinning. What? What happened? Ethan, Lila, Ryan, and Jake were standing around her, their faces pale and drawn. They looked like they had been through hell. Ethan knelt beside her, his eyes filled with concern. Are you okay? You've been out for hours. Maya shook her head, trying to clear the fog from her mind. I don't know. I remember the figure, and the altar, and then nothing. Lila hugged her sketch pad to her chest, her hands trembling. We saw it too. The figure. It showed us things. Terrible things. Ryan nodded, his camera hanging from his neck. It was like it was trying to show us the truth about this place, about what happened here. Jake, who who had been silent, spoke up. "This forest, it's not just a forest, it's a prison for something ancient, something evil." Maya looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. "Where is it? The figure?" Ethan shook his head. "It's gone, but I don't think it's gone for good." Maya stood up, her legs trembling beneath her. "We need to leave, now before it comes back." But as they turned to leave, they heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around them. The trees swayed, and the ground beneath their feet began to shake. The figure reappeared, standing between them and the path out of the forest. Its cloak billowed in an unseen wind, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent light. "You cannot leave," it said, its voice a low, guttural growl. "You have awakened the darkness. Now, you must face it." Before they could respond, the ground beneath them gave way, and they fell into the abyss. The forest was silent once more, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. The stone altar stood in the center of the clearing, the symbols on its surface pulsing with a faint, otherworldly light. The figure stood beside the altar, its glowing eyes fixed on the spot where the group had disappeared. It raised its hand, and the symbols on the altar flared to life, casting an eerie glow over the clearing. Then, the figure spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "The darkness has been awakened, and now it will consume all." With that, the figure disappeared into the mist, leaving the forest silent and still once more. But the darkness remained, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victims. And the whispers never stopped.